So hi guys, let's welcome David Takodoro with the Students Strike Back with Code.
Thank you, Charles. Hi everyone, my name is David Takodoro, and I'll be presenting this talk titled Debian in the Classroom, the Students Strike Back with Code, Episode 3. So the authors of this talk are Paulo Meirelles, who unfortunately couldn't be here. He is an associate professor at the University of São Paulo, which we call USP. Is Portuguese, that's why I say USP, not USP. And I am a PhD student also at USP. So before we really dive in the content of the talk, I imagine some of you might be thinking, why did I bring a Star Wars reference here? So first, let's take things slowly and do a quick warmer. So first of all, let's put a place in the name USP by zooming all the way up from the globe. So USP is located in South America. You can see right at Carpincho is pointing. In South America, it is located in the country of Brazil. And inside the country of Brazil, it is located in the state of São Paulo. But there's a particularity that inside São Paulo, we have quite a few campuses. So the one in which I'm talking about is the one in São Paulo capital, the city, also pointed by our Carpincho there. And more specifically, in the university city of USP campus. So just a small sidetrack, a trivia. That sounds good? Okay. In our Olympic rowing course?
One moment,
okay, no worries.
Can we set this microphone?
Sure, no worries.
Should sit something like that. How's that?
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Good, okay. So, as I was saying, just a small sidetrack, a quick trivia in our Olympic rowing course, which is again pointed in the map by our Carpincho. We have our own many Carpinchos, to the point that we kind of have to do a little bit of birth control because they were getting out of control. So, going back, this is the location of our institution called IME-USP. And IME-USP stands for Institute of Mathematics, Statistics, and Computer Science of the University of São Paulo. So you might be thinking how those many words fit in just IME, because until the start of the year, it was just called Institute of Mathematics and Statistics, and in Portuguese, statistics is estatística with E. And finally, we included computer science in the name. So this is one of the views of our institute. And inside IME-USP, there's this building, which I wished I had a better picture of it because it's really beautiful, which is called Free Software Competence Center, which the acronym is CCSL IME-USP. And inside this building, we teach the free software development course, which in a nutshell is a course with the objective of familiarizing students with the free software development ecosystem with theoretical and more especially practical experiences. So this 4-month course already had 3 offerings, which from now on I'll be calling episodes. So now reference to Star Wars are beginning to come in. And the focus of this talk is to say how we did things in this course, what happened in each of the episodes, the lessons that we learned, and how we included Debian in it. So here are some of broad contents of the talk. So we will see an overview of the course, going through what was common in all of the episodes, then move on to some of the particularities of each one of them. So from episode 1, a new course, episode 2, return of the free software development course, episode 3, the students strike back with code, and finish with a quick conclusion. So I told you I was going to do a little quick warm-up, but I have also just 3 disclaimers before we dive in the meat of the talk. So the first one is that if by any chance you saw my talk on this course in DebConf26, this talk here is loosely based on it, but don't worry, it expands really well and goes into another whole level. So for those of you who already watched this talk, there will be much new information. For example, I didn't start with that whole zoom in into São Paulo and the university. The second disclaimer is that the title really highlights Debian, and we don't mean to mislead you guys, but the focus itself is on the course, but Debian is a major part of it. And number 3, specifically for the Star Wars fans, we know that the original trilogy order is New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, but because of some poetic reasoning, we exchange episode 2 with episode 3. So if you meet me in the dinner queue, please don't slash me in half like Ben Kenobi did with Darth Maul. Okay? So without further ado, let's see how the free software course works. Starting with the demographic of it. So the students were composed of undergraduates, graduates, and special students. And by special students, we mean students that aren't enrolled in either undergraduation or graduation. And when I mean undergrads, I mean specifically students that are enrolled in the Bachelor's Computer Science course in IME-USP. And those students were from the 2nd and 3rd year. And in IME-USP, this means that they have reasonable programming skills, a little bit of knowledge about free software, but most specifically as a concept, but rarely some experience in development itself. In terms of classes, we had 2 dynamics, which are the usual lectures / expositive sessions like this one I'm doing here with slides with someone standing in the front and exposing knowledge. But we also have practical hands-on workshops, which is the core of the course. So if you pay attention, this room here is the same as this one. And maybe you can't be seeing much of a difference, but we can arrange the chairs and open some tables. So much of the course, much of the classes are people sitting around tables, doing what some people call lab work. And we also occupy many places in the CCSL building. So it's really fun when we are taught in the course, because everywhere in the building you can see people in tables, coding, and for example, the people leaning there, so the person leaning there is not me, but is a teaching assistant. The person leaning there is me. So we are like running around, helping people, giving support. And the way we monitor the progress of students is quite in an unusual way if we compare it with other courses that are taught at IME-USP. For example, there are no classic grade tests. And students mainly keep logbooks in the form of blog posts and present follow-up pitches. And meanwhile, we, and by we, I'll be explaining it shortly, we continuously track their progress in and out of the classroom. And the we that I'm talking about is, besides Paulo, which is the main professor, are the dedicated teaching assistants, or TAs, which in Brazil, we don't call it this way, we call it monitores. I don't know if here in Argentina and other countries we call that, but are people which aren't the professor, but kind of absorb roles as professor. So in each of the episodes, we had at least 2 dedicated TAs, I, for example, was a TA in all of those. And in this course, TAs are more like wild cards. So there are courses where TAs just evaluate tests, assign tasks, help in giving lectures. And in the free software development course, we do all of this and much more, but it's really fulfilling. And the main idea is for us to give support in and out of classroom to students in every way, shape, or form we can. But we also, and I would like to highlight this, we heavily rely on what we call those expert collaborators, which essentially are people from the free software world, either industry, academics, that give us a bridge into what the real ecosystem is. So they help with mentoring, present projects, provide materials and directions, and even prepare and conduct some of the workshops. So those guys are really important. And in this course, GNU Linux is at the center of it all. And what I mean by it is that we focus only on projects that directly tie into the GNU Linux ecosystem. This isn't much of a strict definition, but I mean everything that is either the kernel, Linux kernel, or floating around it, for example, distros, but I'll get into that. And speaking of Linux, this course is split in phases, so each one comes before the next, but potentially they extend and overlap with other phases. So phase 0 spans around 2 weeks, phase 1 around 2 months, 2 months also, and 3 2 weeks, and if you sum it all up, it will have more than 4 months, so sometimes we overlap stuff. But going in each phase into details, the first one we use to introduce concepts to free software. So, for example, what are the 4 liberties, licenses, what are licenses, some of the licenses, their importance. We also present some anecdotes. Don't worry, you shouldn't be able to read this, but for this screenshot specifically tells the story about how Git was created. And maybe some people don't know, but it was kind of a spin-off from the Linux kernel project as a consequence of BitKeeper, which was the source control management tool used by the project in 2005 that didn't quite match the philosophy of Linux and many other stuff. So this also works as a way to warm students with the mindset that we want for the course. And speaking of Linux, phase 1 is all about the kernel itself. So we teach how the development model works. So this is a diagram that in a really high level shows how code goes from developers, contributors, to maintainers in the midsection of the hierarchy, up until Linux or other parts of the kernel. If you are not familiar with it, it's a really complex web of projects. We also teach some of the core technical aspects of it. I'm sorry about it. I thought it would be better to see the slides, but this here shows some code, some driver code. So we go from teaching the usual everything is a file in Linux to some basics of character devices. This here is a thread, emails. So we shock students when we show that not only GitHub or GitLab can be used to share and review code. And students at first get a little bit shocked, which I understand. I myself, when I encountered this idea, was kind of confused. But this isn't the worst part, I will tell you. And we provide lots of tutorials and materials for students to get acclimated with Linux from a developer standpoint. So from setting up a VM to how can you compile and deploy a kernel into a VM or a bare metal machine, up until how can you transform this code in this local change in commits and convert those to patches that you could send to upstream. Then we curate some actionable patch suggestions, which those students use to make the final task of phase one, which is to develop, prepare, and send contributions first to our internal validation, then to upstream, and without forgetting about the patch after the initial submission. So this is one of the reasons why I say that phases overlap, because at the end of phase one, people send the patches, and there are many cases where the series and the review process goes back and forth, and even up until the end of the course. Phase two is all about getting the knowledge and also some of the trauma from phase one and branching out to other projects in the GNU Linux ecosystem. So here are some of the projects that we use in phase two, for example, QEMU, Git, the one over there with the loop, sorry, GNOME, KDE, KWorkflow, and many others. And here we hold the hands of the students a lot less, but without letting them go completely. So students can learn, investigate, and immerse themselves in these projects that are whole new worlds inside the GNU Linux ecosystem. And finally, phase three is a quick self-contained workshop that usually has 2 classes on Debian packaging specifically. And what is highlighted that in bold is a little bit of foreshadowing that I will drop a rhetorical question that I hope I'll try to bring an answer at the end of the talk. That is this the best approach? And by best approach, I mean in terms of how the course can leverage Debian and how Debian can also leverage the course. So hopefully I'll answer this at the end of the talk. So okay, great. We now move on to each episode because each one of those has its own plot, particularities, and its own ending. So starting with episode 1, a new course. For those of you who aren't Star Wars fans, there's the original trilogy, which is Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, which back then wasn't called Star Wars 4, 5, and 6. And they had their prequels, which some consider a beast of its own, although they were about the same universe, had common characters, and connected in some shape or form. The course, the Free Software Development course, also had its prequels, as it existed prior from the first episode back in 2024. And those prequels also had the same objective, but they went in a totally different approach and had no restrictions in terms of GNU Linux, and hence it's a whole different course. That's why we call episode 1 A New Hope, a new course. And some of the particularities, in phase 1 of episode 1, we use pads for editing. So this here is a Rise Up pad, which is a great tool if you want to have a quick and easy document that could be collaborated on it. But for our use case, we also did some tutorials on it, which, as you know, you can do much of fancy formatting, and without any malice, students sometimes even deleted some important stuff. So this was a bad thing in phase 1, or in episode 1. Also, what I called our internal validation was completely done manually. So me and other teaching assistants were reviewing all of the patches from students before they send them upstream. So this was not efficient. Sometimes we, the teaching assistants, were the bottleneck of the process. And to be honest, we were kind of overwhelmed. So right at the end of phase 1, there was much work to be done. And we only worked on a single subsystem, which namely was the industrial input and output, also known as IIO. And we also allowed coding style patches, which there's no problem with those, but the thing is that we weren't confident enough to point students to things that were much more ambitious. And even the other suggestions beyond the code cleaning patches were barely more challenging. So now moving to phase 2. In this first iteration, we relaxed a lot of the requirement in terms of GNU Linux. Actually, we didn't relax it. We weren't too much stricter back then. So this here is a screenshot of a blog post of one of the students talking about how she contributed to the new shell project, which is another shell, which doesn't necessarily ties into the GNU Linux ecosystem. And in phase 3, this isn't, I'm not trying to throw any shade in the Perl, but we just focused on the packaging workshop in Perl. And the thing that I would like to highlight here is that we did things in much haste. We didn't plan it too much. Before the workshop, around a week or so, me and Paulo got the idea, maybe we can contact someone from the Debian community. And we did, and said, okay, how about we give a quick workshop? And this person was really nice to us and got on board. But we, and especially him, wasn't too much prepared to do this. So the main thing about episode 1 is that we were resolving things as they go, because this was our first rodeo. So we readjusted many things on the fly. So kind of like this Mike Tyson quote, that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. I mean, this quote, it kind of distills what this first episode was, and I do like it, but I feel that is a bit aggressive, so I prefer this next one, which is from Paulo himself, that states that the only thing certain about a plan is that it will certainly change, and maybe you recognize this because it's a shorter version of a can't back quote. And this became kind of the mantra of our course, because we always start the course saying this. And to be honest, I feel that this is really true and straight to the point, and I also carry this kind of as a life philosophy. So some other things to highlight in episode 1. There was little to no automation, and by saying little, I mean really good with us back then, because there was really no automation. And at the beginning of the course, chaos ensued, and both the students and we, teaching assistant and professor, were really confused. And even in the start, the middle, we felt like, don't know if this idea of this new course was going to work out. But at the end, it's surprisingly, and mind the quotes, because we believed in the idea, but we were kind of surprised that it worked out in the end. So this was a very successful edition for doing the thing from the first time. Now moving on to episode 2, return of the free software development course. We carried some lessons from episode 1. So we wanted to expand phase 1 contribution. We wanted to enforce phase 2 requirement of GNU Linux ecosystem projects. And we wanted to plan much better in much advance for phase 3. And we also noticed that we needed to review and update the materials. For example, some of the tutorials, especially the ones for the Linux kernel, had a few problems in it. They didn't consider all the possible setups, and doing kernel development is kind of hard because you kind of need to look into the first layer of the software, but I'm diverging myself. So we needed essentially to review all of those materials and even expand on them. And also we noticed that a hard requirement to do the course was for you to have a bare metal Linux machine, which we like to sell the idea to students to use Linux, and especially now, I even try to budge in the Debian idea. But the reality is that some students couldn't have a machine or couldn't bring the machine to the class, and because of much of the work was done during class in those workshops, we needed to come to a solution. So these are some of the lessons, the main lessons we learned from episode 1. But the way we handled things, some of the changes were in phase 1, we introduced some deduplication suggestions for patches, which are good because you don't need to understand it really well what you are developing, but also they aren't as much simple as doing coding style cleans. We also added another subsystem to the mix, which was the AMD display core, which maybe we can't call it a subsystem, but because it's part of the AMD drivers, which is part of the DRM, but we included another option for students. And for phase 2, we stick to the plan of keeping it religiously to GNU Linux projects, and you see that I faded some of those initial projects that I showed, because there weren't too much projects that we offered. For example, Git, Key-Workflow, GNOME. There are other fews, but they didn't have a logo, so I felt it wouldn't match to just have logos and some names on it. And for phase 3, we did plan in advance to Debian packaging workshops. So we contact the expert collaborators around 2 months before, or a month and a half before the workshop. And due to that, the Debian collaborators could plan in advance and actually did a really good exposition workshop on the community, the philosophy, and packaging in an abstract way. And also did a really cool thing, which I thank a lot. At the end of the talk, I'll namely cite every one of those collaborators, which was to curate and prepare small, simple contributions that I like to call wetting the field contributions, because students didn't have to do much work, didn't have to understand the whole process to come with a contribution and have it accepted. So virtually all students had a contribution accepted in the end. And the thing is that I imagine people here, most people here know a little bit about packaging, and it's really, really complex stuff. So doing this in 2 weeks, it's kind of hard to keep people motivated, understanding things and ending up with a contribution. So this was a really nice thing. And some other particularities of episode 2 were that we reviewed and expanded the materials. So we wrote more tutorials. We fixed some of the problems of the tutorials. And we also provided an SSH server for the students who didn't have access to a Linux box. And also this, in another level, the success of the course was surprisingly, once again, mind the quotes, because it was, we hoped that it would be much more successful, but in the end it ended up being similarly successful and also similarly chaotic. But we ended up really satisfied with the end result. And now we go to the final episode, which we called The Students Strike Back with Code. And this here is when we shined, I would say. So from episode 1 and 2, we knew that we needed to dive much deeper into the kernel internals to prepare students for phase 1, because even though we advanced stuff, we felt that we could go a little bit further. We also wish to provide more complex and fun suggestion of patches. So we needed to enhance the tooling and add a little bit of automation to the process because it wouldn't scale. And mainly, we wanted to make Debian much more present in the course as a whole. So in terms of phase 1, if you paid attention, this is the same screenshot that I showed in the start of the presentation, because this is the state of the art. The last time we did phase 1 was through this. So in this specific slide, we thought about driver development, some memory mapped I/O, how drivers are developed, how can you initialize those, and all of this other stuff that we thought students might be too scared to see, but it ended up paying out to show them these things early. We completely exterminated that messy web of paths and converting them into neat and clean web pages, while once again reviewing and expanding those materials. And we upped the game with contributions that were a little bit more complex and fun, not so much complex. So for example, we pointed them to update the synchronization primitives on mutex lock and unlock using guard mutex, some bit field manipulations with some macros, other stuff like include what you use, and many fun stuff. And I would call it a side effect because we didn't plan for it, that students organically conquered or unlocked a bunch of new subsystems / subprojects. For example, people sent patches to media, sound more specifically, to the new block device, other parts of AMD, for example, graphics and the media inside AMD, Rust for Linux, for example, NovaCore, which is the new Novo drivers, one could say, and a few other parts of the kernel. And finally, we came up with many automations to do our own validation, internal validation, including our own mailing list, our own lore instance. For those of you who don't know, public inbox, which is the technology behind lore, is a way for you to, in a nutshell, consume mailing lists on an on-demand way, so you don't need to subscribe to them to receive all of the emails flowing on those lists. But it also allows us to do some fun stuff. For example, we plugged our own CI into lore, which had our own mailing lists. So in the end, there was no necessity for manual reviewing. We did manual review because it was fun and because we felt like sometimes, or should I say, most of the part in giving feedback also needs to come from the social aspect and commit messages and all of those stuff. But we weren't more the bottleneck of the process, and we had much less effort, even though there were much more students and doing much more complex stuff without lowering the quality. And in terms of phase 2, we planned it in advance, even better, and even included Debian as a certain part of it. So in the end, everything seemed perfect, like really perfectly, and we were feeling really well about it. But remember the mantras of the course, right? That everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and the only thing certain about a plan is that it will certainly change. So the students did strike, but not with code. They entered a strike, which was around the end of June, or in the end of April, and until mid of June, classes stopped, and I don't want to enter the merit of the strike, but it began right after phase 1, so the upside is that we could finish a thread before the strike started. And after the strike ended, we did our best to pick up where we left off, and the students struck back again, but with code this time, and things worked surprisingly well. And now I didn't put the quotes because this was really surprising. We were lowering our expectations. But in the end, even with much limited time, we managed to present all planned phase 2 projects. And virtually all students found a project, made a contribution, and a good one for that matter. But what about Debian, right? Well, there were only a few groups that chose Debian, which is normal because there were a bunch of projects, and I didn't mention this, but students organized themselves in doubles or triples. So I think it were 3 groups, which is a good amount of people working in Debian. And even so, they did contributions of maybe, I would say, much deeper impact than the ones from the previous workshop, because it mixed special mentoring from the collaborators and I would say the usual mentoring in terms of the Brazilian Debian Devel community. For example, joining the weekly meetings, looking at the official documentation of the Debian Devel BR. In this sense, there was less effort spent from the collaborators, yet possibly more return was obtained. And after a conversation with our Debian collaborator, which is, funny enough, Charles, for the next episodes, we plan to permanently move Debian to phase 2, condense the workshops of phase 3 as the starting point of phase 2 for Debian. And also, I envision a follow-up course just focused on Debian for a smaller classroom with only students that contributed to Debian in phase 2. So a separate course from the free software development course totally focused on Debian. But we also don't want to drop phase 3 because it had a lot of interesting and fun stuff, but make it open to the whole USP community, or even open to anyone who wishes to go there and learn a little bit about packaging. And the idea behind condensing phase 3 is because we can hit much more higher audience, make them more interested in packaging, and not lose this effort and this excitement by continuing with a longer project 2 phase, or phase 2 project. And sorry. So wrapping things up, we feel like that in each new episode, we take many steps forwards while taking a few steps backward, and that the students end up fulfilled without getting too much overwhelmed, just like we end up really fulfilled and without getting too much overwhelmed. But the most important thing that I would like to do is to invite you all to give us any ideas on how can we improve, or any thoughts on how the free software course is taught. And that is why you notice that I thought I would have more time, but okay. The most important thing is to get feedbacks from all of you. So last but not certainly least, I would like to thank all collaborators. So I'll namely cite each one of them. So Rodrigo Siqueira, Melissa Wen, Magali Lemes, Marcelo Schmidt, Antônio Terceiro, Charles Oliveira, Aquila Macedo, Joênio Costa, Alexandre Abdo, Lucas Kanashiro, Charles Melara, Lucas Oshiro, Matheus Tavares, Jorge Travacas, Farid Abdelnour, Thiago Hergenstein, and everyone else that collaborated with us. And once again, sorry if I forgot anyone. And of course, all the TAs that played a role in each of the editions. So thanks to Lucas Estanco, Rafael Passos, Marcelo Espessotto, Guilherme Ivo, and Arthur Piloni. And just like I did in DebConf26 talk, I would like to finish this one with excerpts from The Freedom by Cecília Meirelles, which is a legendary Brazilian writer, that says, and I hope I don't butcher it, so I would really read it. We are then creatures long nourished by freedom, inclined to sing it, love it, fight for it, and certainly die for it. In short, to be free is to be responsible, to reject the condition of being an automaton or remotely controlled is to proclaim the luminous triumph of the spirit. I suppose that's what it is. And with that, I thank you all for the attention, and I am now open for questions, comments, or any suggestions, so thank you all.
So, questions?
Well, it's easy. Which are the requirements to apply to that course in São Paulo?
I would say that the demographic shouldn't be too much, the concepts of free software shouldn't be too much alien to the demographic. And some basic programming skills, I didn't said this in the talk, but a basic knowledge of Git is required because Git is essential too for developing much more in free software. But beyond that, I would say that having teaching systems and most importantly, having those expert collaborators, that's why you see here that there are lots and lots of collaborators with all those guys, which some of them are here also. None of this would be possible. But beyond that, not so much a physical space where you could have in local workshops, because doing things there when people are focused and executing, doing the tutorials, problems arise and you solve them and you see kind of a small community, a bubble community they're forming, so there are much strict requirements beyond that.
We also need a professor willing to help us, right? So that's...
Yes, that's true.
Phase 3, is this working? Yeah. On phase 3, you said you didn't do any manual review anymore because you have automation. I was wondering, what do you mean with manual review? Because automation can check for syntax, compilation errors, and maybe coding style changes, but do you still have a round of review of semantic stuff and logic of the patch before having the students send out, or do you allow them to just send the patches out without?
Okay, thanks. I don't know if I was confusing, but the manual review was only for phase 1 for the Linux part. And yes, this is a concern because maybe we got too much excited with the automation that we left off the manual reviewing. So that's why I said that we came back and manually reviewed those contributions because we had some feedback from the mailing list, the actual upstream mailing list, saying some stuff that we could catch early if we did a manual review. So we are still improving our CI because I wouldn't say most, but a great part of the problems aren't easily catchable through the CI. So certainly that's a thing that we can forget about the manual part, the semantic part of it. Thank you. Okay, go.
First I want to say that this looks awesome, and I wish I was able to get to a course like this. This looks like really, really exciting way of framing the education. I hope your students also saw that while they were in it. One thing I'm thinking is when I sometimes talks with some newcomers to Debian, then some of them say, well, we don't use Debian, we use Arch, and they're a little embarrassed, but at the same time, they are clearly not embarrassed. They are excited about their work on Arch. What I think, I have never used Arch myself, but what I think is the point of what is the driving motivator of those people, not everybody, but those people who choose the Arch way, is to have an ownership of their own exploration. And it seems, I don't know, but it seems like all these projects are all of them safe little projects because it's someone else is telling you what they need, and you need to like submerge into what they are dictating, what they need. And maybe it's a proposal, maybe there's an idea for and I would love to help. I'm offering my help. I think that there is a way to make projects, not for everybody, but some people might want to say, I want to work in the way of Arch, but within Debian. How can I customize my desktop? How can I create my space within Debian and then have it stick and it's sustainable? So how can you collaborate with Debian maintainers, package maintainers on having your customizations be affected into the system, but it's you dictating what you want, not the upstream or the main package maintainer. That's a suggestion for a twist.
Thanks so much, Jonas. That's one of the great things about this talk, to get this suggestion. I will poke you after for us to talk. Thank you. That's a really nice idea. Thank you.
So let's thank Davi for the talk.